5, 6, 7, 8.
Hi EXers, welcome to the EX Podcast, episode number 48. This is your host, Stefan Vincent. I'm here today with you because we need to shake things up in the world of HR, talent acquisition, recruiting, and company culture in order to create positive employee experiences in our organizations. And your workplace doesn't have to be a dreadful place where employees feel disengaged. This podcast brings a different lens to the HR, employee engagement, and company culture conversation. We approach these topics from a brand and customer experience angle rather than a traditional HR angle. Our guests, all thought leaders and disruptors in the EX space in their own way, come to this show to share best practices on the key elements that foster employee engagement and strengthen company culture, and also to spark the conversation on how to create positive employee experiences. Not every company can do what Airbnb or Google do around their employee experience, and this is what this show is all about. Sharing stories of companies of all sizes, not only to show that EX doesn't require a large budget or a large team, but also that there isn't one recipe. Each company can find its own way through the EX journey. Today's guest is Bryan Chaney, Director of Global Employer Brands and Talent Attraction at Indeed, the world's #1 job search engine. Today with Bryan, we will talk about what makes Indeed's employer brand. What are some of the tactics Bryan's team has implemented to not only share Indeed's story, but to create a strong candidate experience? Which metrics he's implemented to measure the success of Indeed's talent attraction strategy? What Indeed does to ensure consistency across all the stages of the candidates and employee journey? And finally, how Indeed creates a unified but yet customized culture globally across its multiple locations. This episode is brought to you by Fusion Alliance. Fusion Alliance delivers holistic solutions fusing together data, digital, and technology to redefine customer experiences and move your ideas to execution. And that's why business across multiple industries have relied on Fusion's expertise and partnership for over 25 years. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Bryan. If you get a chance, please make sure to review the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, or YouTube. And last thing, if you want to send me feedback, suggestions for future topics or guests, you can reach me at svincent@exsummit.com or on Twitter at @EX_summit. All right, let's get to it. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the EX Podcast. Super excited for today's guest, Bryan Chaney. Bryan is calling from Austin, Texas, and he is the Director of Employer Branding and Talent Acquisition at a company that you may know of, Indeed.com. Bryan, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks very much for having me. I'm excited to be here and share a little bit about what we do.
All right, so first, a very easy question always for our guests. Can you tell us a bit more about who you are, and for those who are not familiar with Indeed, what Indeed does and what the company is?
Absolutely. So believe it or not everyone is familiar with Indeed globally. We're in several different global markets, and we are #1 worldwide as far as job search engines are concerned, but we're still growing in certain markets. And so it's a conversation that we have all the time of just explaining that Indeed is the job search engine that makes it easier to search, get the right information to supplement career decisions, and also give you some background information around culture of the companies that you're considering applying for and joining. And so that's really Indeed in a nutshell. Our mission is we help people get jobs. And so everything really boils back down to that. And I sit in Austin, Texas, and my team is a little bit dispersed because we support global talent attraction. So the employer brand team is actually 6 people, soon to be 8 people. So we're growing and excited.
So, and what is your background?
My background is actually a marketing background. And so I, like a lot of people, I backed into recruiting, and I actually applied to a web and graphic design job almost 14 years ago, and didn't realize that the recruiting agency was actually hiring for themselves. So I got offered the job, started, and with a design and marketing background, I started sourcing and launching targeted digital marketing campaigns for a list of clients. And so really was just focused on using my marketing background first, and then I started learning about the industry and what we do, how we do it. The advent of social media in recruiting added a whole other dimension, and I've learned a lot along the way.
How is Indeed organized around HR, talent acquisition, and employer branding?
Well, talent acquisition, or talent attraction as we call it, includes the employer brand team, and we all roll up into the human resources organization at Indeed. And so we're all on the same team. The 3 things that we're focused on are attracting talent, engaging talent, and then measuring what we're doing, because everything is data driven around what we do, and everything is tested. So we have teams around the world. The 3 biggest groups are supported by region. So we've got Americas, APAC or Asia Pacific, and then EMEA, or Europe, Middle East, and Africa.
So as you mentioned, Indeed's customers use the platform to post their job openings and promote the employer brands. And you have to promote your own Indeed brands to your candidates. So how do you define Indeed's employer brands? And the next question is, what are some of the tactics that you've implemented to be able to tell your brand story and reach out to job candidates?
And that's a big question. So let me see if I can tackle it piece by piece.
Yes.
As you think about our employer brand, or our promise to potential employees, everything had to be aligned to our mission. And it's a huge mission, but it's one that makes sense to a lot of people, because as humans, most of us need to work. We need to provide for ourselves, for our families. And as we started thinking about the value proposition or the promise, everything was an extension of what we looked at as our mission. So if you think about, we help to have a helpful spirit of service, that's really, really key for a lot of Indeedians, as we call ourselves. So we help people. And so the people aspect is, these are real people providing for their families, trying to put food on the table, keep roofs over their families' heads. And it's not just people behind a browser. So we understand that these are people who have real experiences and real needs. And then the last part is the get jobs function. So we help people get jobs. And the distinction here is really important, because it's not just about finding jobs. It's about getting jobs. It's about understanding what you need to really pursue that career and achieve it. And that there's a lot of layers there. And so it's not just, hey, here are some jobs that somebody paid us to post, but here are all the world's jobs, and we want to help you find the right one, the right fit for you.
And I would say that the bar is raised pretty high, because, obviously Indeed is a platform for companies to post jobs and for candidates to look for jobs. So when you attract candidates, your own candidate experience has to be on the top, so that they feel compelled to buy your services, basically.
Well, so, and by buy your services, you mean go through
for companies to pay Indeed to post their jobs.
So you're asking if the measure of our candidate experience impacts our clients' decision to buy or use Indeed's products?
No, I was saying that actually your candidate experience has to be very compelling and very good, so that your your brand's experience itself is good and compelling.
Exactly. And I look at this journey as really a consumer journey. And I know that a lot of people have talked about marketing being consumer facing when it comes to recruiting and candidates as clients. But I really think that people are buying. They're making a buying decision with their time. They're spending hours of their life, their creativity, their energy, and a lot of emotional investment. And so they're spending their time, and what they're getting back is this experience that people are selling. So for us, we have to package that in such a way that it makes sense and is as transparent as possible, not to use another buzzword, but really want to show them what the experience is like so they can know, hey, does this really look like the right fit for me, or should I opt out because this isn't really a match? And I think that's one of the upsides of doing a good job raising the employer brand awareness externally.
You mentioned earlier in the introduction that the employee branding and talent attraction is aligned with HR at Indeed. And so from what we spoke about to prep for this call, you mentioned that the human resources function at Indeed oversees employer branding, talent attraction, learning and development, and total awards as well. And I think it's pretty good because the problem when all of those teams work in silos in many organizations is the lack of continuity and consistency through the entire candidate and employee journey. And usually I'd like to talk about the employee experience governance, which addresses this sort of silo problem. So how does Indeed ensure consistency across all the different stages of the candidate and the employee experience?
And the candidate journey is really a long one, actually, right? So you're thinking about prospect or potential hire, which is a big group. And then you go into candidate, which is someone who's indicated an interest that's actually qualified for the role.
Right.
And then hopefully you get to employee. And so all of these, and then you go from employee to alumni, right, or alumnus. And so if you understand that that's the entire journey. And so there's within HR, we tackle as many different pieces of that as we can, because we realize that what we're selling on the front end has to match on the back end with that experience. So if we talk about opportunity for career growth and development, we need to make sure that not only is the opportunity there, but we're communicating it internally so people understand the path and how to pursue it.
What are some of the processes or some of the frameworks that you have in place to ensure that consistency across all those different stages? Because it's one thing to be able to have a great story to attract potential candidates, and then they go through the interview process, which may be a great experience, and then suddenly they hand it off to their own managers, and the managers may not be able to provide this sort of a promise of what the brand experience was supposed to be because their manager is not great at managing people. So how do you guys ensure consistency across all those different stages of the entire candidate-employee journey?
Well, one of the factors that impacts that, as you said, not all managers are created equal, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you understand that and you can define a curriculum around what does make a good manager, and then define that here at Indeed, because what makes a good manager at another organization might be different. And so it's understanding how does management work at Indeed, and how can we prepare people not only as individuals growing into management roles, but also understanding how they can then turn around and relate to people that they were just peers with, right? So how do you especially in a high growth company like Indeed, there's a lot of that happening where people are getting promoted into management roles, and then there's a whole new dynamic. And so a lot of that is addressed with our training and employee development program. We have a really robust team that manages that globally. And then we constantly ask for feedback and internal feedback around how we're doing, how management can actually perform better based on that individual's needs, because we realize that not everything is going to be the same for every employee.
So let's focus a little bit on the front end of what happens at Indeed and in your space in terms of employer branding and talent attraction. How would you define the unique elements of Indeed's employee value proposition and employer brands?
How would I define the elements?
Yes. What would be the unique elements or the differentiators of Indeed versus another company?
A lot of that is driven by our mission. We're really a tech company. People see us potentially as an HR tech company, potentially as just a job board, where we've gone way past in the arc of the company. So if you look at what differentiates us, number one, it's got to be the mission, because there's a bigger reason why we do what we do. And an example of that is even in our conference rooms, we think about putting the job seeker first. And there are orange chairs in each of our conference rooms globally that represent the job seeker. So there's one orange chair in each conference room. And it's a point that it's a simple visual cue, but that drives everything else home. Okay, what is this going to mean for the job seeker? So the mission is huge around our value proposition. And then the other piece is just how we empower people to be successful once they're here, and what does that path look like? So there's a crazy amount of development. It's all a little bit different, right? So I can't give you one answer that works for every different department or business unit.
Right.
But specifically around engineering, I know that the engineering career path is very different than in other organizations, because as you think about what you need to grow in your development skills, what you need to learn, and how you grow, not everybody is made to be a manager. And so it's understanding that the management path is very special, and how that person makes that transition from an individual contributor into a manager. So there's a whole development path and plan that we go through. So that part I think is very different. And back to the engineering piece, I feel like it's a really big part of how we structure the teams is driven by what each individual team wants to accomplish. So there's not a whole lot of heavy-handedness around specific goal setting. Each team is working on a product or a feature within a product, and so they're really defining a lot of things on their own as far as what success looks like. So very, very self-driven and autonomous as far as those teams are concerned.
What kind of research and what methodologies have you applied to really understand what is the candidate experience at Indeed?
Well, part of it is going to be the anecdotal feedback that everybody pretty much hears. There's feedback that people get via reviews on different various websites around what was my interview experience, or how did this impact my decision to pursue this company as I'm a consumer, in addition to the fact that I'm a candidate. And so we have all that information. We collect and review and respond to all those different ratings and reviews on lots of different channels, and my team manages that. But in addition to that, I think even more critically is the direct feedback. So as a candidate, we actually ask for that feedback, that candidate experience feedback, within 48 hours after there's a decision one way or another on a candidate status. And so we want to give them a couple days. So even, the majority of people who apply to a job aren't necessarily going to get that job. And so what we want to do is we want to give them time to process that information. We give them some feedback, and then we give them a couple days to really think about their experience. How did we do? What could we do better? How did information that we shared impact their impression of Indeed as a company? And so we go through that. We collect that feedback in an automated fashion now, in addition to offering communication channels if someone wants to have a conversation. So there's all kinds of different layers in how we collect that information and share that back in the aggregate from a leadership perspective, and then also understanding what that means to the individual recruiting manager or recruiter themselves and how they can improve their game.
That's interesting that you, what is the response rate or percentage for candidates who didn't get the job? What's your reply to your survey? Do you have an idea?
So I don't have those numbers off the top of my head. I do know, that it's a good amount volume wise. It's a relatively, it's not like a huge percentage, but numbers wise, because of our application volume, we get a lot of feedback information. And so we have a good read on how we're doing by recruiter, and then also at the macro level by recruiting department. It's
an interesting take because, obviously it's not because a candidate is rejected or is not offered an opportunity right away that candidate is gone forever, right? So somehow the experience itself has to be positive so that the candidate feels compelled to reapply at some point, right? So how do you manage the process so that you don't upset candidates who may not be extended a job offer right away, even though you know that they may have some qualifications, but then exactly what you're looking for at that instance, or maybe they need a bit more experience in that field before they get hired at Indeed?
Sure. So obviously the first thing that someone wants is they want direct feedback. They want to know why they might not have made the cut. And so we provide as much feedback as we can to them to help them understand their own journey, because not everybody has a firm grasp of that, especially in relation to a role that they might not completely understand. Mm-hmm. So there's that piece, right? We give them feedback. But then the other piece is when we realize that, the majority of people who do apply to jobs, they don't get that actual job they're applying for. We have lots of other options. And so the long-term approach is through talent networks that we've set up on our career site. And so that gives people the ability to sign up for information. So not just jobs, because, we're Indeed. People know how to find jobs,
right,
and see the jobs that we have available. But beyond that is the content that we have. And by content, I mean the stories around culture, the things that people have accomplished, the people that are part of an organization that you're looking at potentially joining. And so we curate that information and we send it out through our networks that are unique to each skill set. So there's an engineering talent network, a sales talent network, a marketing talent network, and each has a series of communication that actually shares information over time about what that experience is going to be like. So they can not only understand that, hey, while you might not have been a fit for this one job, you actually have the ability to keep up with Indeed over time. Mm-hmm. So as your career arc aligns with a role that opens at Indeed, you'll already understand why it's a fit.
You mentioned just in your answer previously that you try to provide feedback to candidates who didn't get the job. Right now, many organizations just don't want to provide that feedback because maybe of some HR regulations or fear of saying too much or saying actually something that is not HR approved or legal. So what kind of feedback do you provide? Do you actually get into the specifics of why the candidate was not extended an offer? Or would you stay somehow objective and a bit generic?
So there's a little bit of both. So at a minimum, there's a fairly generic response that explains that we're moving in the direction of another potential candidate, mm-hmm. And that there were certain things that they didn't fit as far as qualifications were concerned. And we also offer the ability to follow up with us and have that communication, because as a candidate, they've been communicating back and forth with our recruiting team, and they can ask those questions. And we also encourage them to message us, whether it's status or other specific types of feedback or other open jobs. We offer the communication channels on social through Inside Indeed. So if you look at Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, those channels offer communication as well as an insight into the culture and why someone would want to work here.
On the customer marketing side, I would say we've talked for some years now about inbound versus outbound marketing. Now, it seems like talent acquisition or attraction and employer branding are embracing that notion of inbound versus outbound employer marketing or branding. What do you guys do in that area between inbound and outbound marketing? So you mentioned about building that network of candidates, have that pool of talents that you continue to engage even though they may not be extended a job offer right away. So what do you do in terms of inbound versus outbound marketing?
Building that long-term, thinking about both inbound and outbound, is that what you mean?
Yes.
So just for clarification, inbound is when a candidate sees a piece of content or is referred or seeks out opportunities on their own and either applies or approaches us in some way that we can track and measure. Mm-hmm. And then obviously outbound, because everybody needs a mix. There's nobody that hires everybody from one channel or another.
Right. But
then the outbound piece is going to be sourcing and outreach. And so we have a mix of that, and we use lots of different tools. A lot of what we use are Indeed products around being able to source, identify, and engage people in that conversation. So between the two, our inbound has a lot to do with creating content and really being able to leverage not only our like sponsored jobs on Indeed, but also how are we telling the rest of the story? So are we creating videos that tell a story for a certain group? Are we sharing blog posts of someone who's had a unique journey through Indeed? All those different pieces that help really explain that path and what that means. So all that, external advertising turns into inbound traffic, which is a huge channel for us, particularly on the referrals. And so like a lot of organizations, we have about 40% of our hiring that is filled from the inbound referral channel.
You have about 26 offices globally. Is that right?
That's correct.
And most of your employees actually work in one of those offices. You have a very small number of complete remote employees. So
we do.
Yeah, go ahead. So the question is, sorry, go ahead, Bryan.
I was just going to say, we're actually tipping the scales on that, and so we're seeing more and more of our positions opening remotely. Where yes, the majority of our roles are in those offices, but more and more roles are opening up as remote options. And even though like it might be a remote option with some travel or 100% remote, our hiring managers are becoming more and more open to that. As we grow, we have to broaden and change what we think is the source of our best hires, if that makes sense.
Yes. So how do you manage a global employer brands across multiple regions in the on the globe? Because obviously, I would imagine that some of the brand value propositions are very similar across the different regions, but you may have some specificities as well.
Sure. So I'll give you an example. As you think about our internal employees, and I'll go back to the remote ones just for a second. As you think about how we make people feel included, we do a really good job globally of making sure people are fed really well, which sounds interesting when you think about it, when you just say it flatly like that. But we provide snacks and drinks and paid time off and all these different things, all these things that make an experience better. But for remote employees, we actually send out quarterly snack packs to them with food and snacks for them as part of the global team. So that's one piece around making remote employees feel included. But you make a great point around the global piece, because every perception is going to be a little bit different in each country. And that's something that you know in principle, but until you start messaging and engaging people in Dusseldorf, Germany, in Paris, France, in Tokyo, Japan, you really start to understand that perception is going to be a little bit different. It's all driven by our mission, but the priorities within there, the things that you use to start those conversations, are a little bit different in each market based upon those cultural nuances.
Yeah, that makes sense. So how many remote employees do you have right now? An idea? And how many employees do you have total, first of all, and how many of them are remote?
So I don't have the specific number of remote employees, but I do know that we've just passed 6,000 employees globally, and we have a growing number of remote employees. And you can even filter on Indeed.jobs by remote jobs by region, whether that's Americas, EMEA, or APAC, and see all the open jobs there. So all those things are things that are constantly in flux. Because we're growing so much, we're trying to understand that mix that makes sense for our hiring managers.
Okay. How many employees do you have actually working in Austin?
In Austin, we have actually over 1,200 employees. And so that's the largest concentration of employees that we have globally. And we actually have 3 offices open now. Because we're growing so much, it's harder to get everybody under one specific roof.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about measurement as well. So obviously a big piece of marketing in general, and whether it's employee marketing or customer marketing, if we define it this way, is to be able to measure the impact on any marketing efforts that are going on. So what kind of metrics do you put in place to measure the effectiveness of your employer brand initiatives, and what are what channels or what platforms are the most relevant and deliver the most success in your efforts?
Sure. So, I mean, this is not going to come as a huge surprise to you, but Indeed is our number one source of external hire.
And that makes sense, hopefully.
Yeah. So it varies based on market, right? As we're continuing to grow and expand in certain markets, but by far, Indeed is our biggest source of external hire. When you think about how you measure those marketing results, yes, we have our own Indeed account rep. We work through a budget. We have numbers that we have to hit and adjustments, just like any other Indeed client. And so for us, we measure a lot of that big piece of advertising and that return on that inbound traffic. The other piece, so there's the numbers, the 3 sets of numbers that I really like to refer to are the first one, which is going to be awareness. Do people know who we are, and how do we measure that? So part of that is are people following our company pages across lots of different channels? So following there. Are they following our social properties? Are they engaging with our content? Those are all the numbers that are fairly easy to report on. And so that's the awareness piece. And then that's, okay, they know who we are. And the next step is what I call affinity. So do they actually care who we are, right? And what that means is, do they care enough to share their contact information with us, to say, you know what, I'm okay having a career conversation with you. And so we measure that through a couple different things. The main one is going to be our talent networks. So as we drive membership in our talent networks, we realize that those are people who are ready to have a communication over time, more long term. So they might not be open to seeking a job opportunity now, or they might be looking and they might not find anything that's relevant to their career move at this moment available on the site. And so what that allows them to do is stay in touch with us long term. And again, we have the sequence of communication that's specific to each discipline. So someone as an engineer could say, you know what, I don't see an open role right now, or I'm not ready yet, but Indeed seems like a cool company. So I'll share my contact information, and then over the next several weeks, I'll get more information about what it's like to work in the engineering department. So driving that affinity is a big measure for us and people who are signing up to communicate with us over time. So that's the second one. And then the third one is going to be the super easy one that all recruiters will appreciate, and that's applications. Mm-hmm. So how do we drive applications? So more on the recruitment, marketing, and advertising side, that's the kind of the mindset. So you think about employer branding, it's a long-term approach, right? It's we want people to be interested in the company, in the culture, in all these different facets. Whereas recruitment, marketing, and advertising is, hey, we want you to be interested in this job right now because we're trying to hire. So if you're ready to apply, if you're ready to change jobs, if what we're offering seems appealing, then definitely we want you to convert. We want you to apply. And that's a big driver for us because, yes, we have long-term conversations, but we have a lot of people who will find out about Indeed and they'll say, oh, I had no idea that you were this size company. I didn't know you had over 6,000 employees. I didn't know you were in 26 offices globally. I'm going to look and apply to a job right now because this actually sounds like something that I'm really interested and ready for. And so those three aspects are what we measure as we think about our employer brand. And by the way, my team manages the recruitment, marketing, and advertising as well as traditional employer brand. So both of those strategies overlap in my team. Okay.
How many offices do you have in the U.S.?
In the U.S., and I might go to my fingers and toes here because we actually have a lot of offices that have opened up secondary or tertiary locations. Mm-hmm. So in Seattle we have 2 offices now that are open, whereas traditionally we've had 1 office. In Austin, we have 3 offices. We're on the East Coast, we're in New York and Stamford. We're also in Scottsdale, as well as San Francisco, which has also opened up a secondary office in the South Bay in San Francisco, and then also in San Mateo. So that's just the U.S. We have a Toronto office. We have a Sao Paulo office, just if you're thinking about the Americas. So that's the biggest concentration of offices.
Okay, and it makes sense because, obviously you cannot find talent only in the Austin area and Texas. You have to go in other locations to find the right talents. And oftentimes a relocation might be a challenge for those who not necessarily want to move to a different place. So it's one of the reasons I would assume, like many other companies, that you open up offices in other parts of the country and in the world.
We sure do. And even Chris Himes, our president, mentioned, you go where the talent is. And that's a lot of why we've driven our growth the way we have, is so that we can hire people that we want to hire where they live and work.
Right. Now, because you have all those different locations, do you guys have programs for people to even come from those satellite offices to the corporate office or headquarters in Austin for fast track to promotion or management position or these type of things? Do you have a sort of exchange programs between offices as well?
There's actually a lot of travel between offices. We've even had employees, actually request that they want to move to a certain area, and then they work it out with their manager if that person can work out of that office. An example recently was one of the product scientists wanted to work out of the San Francisco office, and she wanted to move there, and there wasn't, her team didn't exist there. And so they actually created a role for her out in the San Francisco area. And so that's just one example. Another example is someone on the HR team who worked out of Dublin, and they actually wanted to move to Sydney. And so we were able to actually shift and reorganize, because we want to make sure that if someone wants or needs to move to a certain area, they can do that. And if their job allows them to work remotely, then they're even more empowered to do that. I know of a couple of other examples where people have started in the Austin office, and then their significant others got jobs in other parts of the country. Mm-hmm. And so they would move, but the majority of their job is done digitally anyway. and we communicate via Hangouts, on the phone. Everything, the majority of everything can be done digitally. So we work with them to make sure that they are set up for success.
So office space, is always mentioned as a key element to the company culture and the employee experience. But with a remote or distributed workforce, as Indeed has, technology plays a huge role in that collaboration and that's sort of embracing the company culture on a day-to-day basis, even from other locations than headquarters. So how do you guys leverage that technology to be able to get your employees not only collaborate together, but somehow experience what the company culture is about?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the communication aspect is huge. So tracking all the communication, whether it's email, chat, Hangout, all these different things are taking place. We also encourage travel when possible, especially with dispersed teams. We want to make sure that each manager has the ability to spend time with the people on their team and vice versa. And so one of our policies is at least twice a year empowering managers to go visit their employee if their employee is in a remote office, or bring their employee in to visit with the manager or the team, because we realize that connection, that face-to-face connection, is super important. And then when you think about remote employees, there's just providing them little touches like the snack packs I mentioned every quarter for remote employees, and then they also get gift cards for ergonomic office supplies, things that give them some of the creature comforts that if you're in an office, you kind of might take for granted. But if you're working out of home, you might be sitting there at your kitchen table with your cat walking across your keyboard. And so it would be really helpful if you had a standing desk, or if you had an ergonomic chair, or some other tool to help you work more efficiently, or just take care of yourself physically. And so those are things that we also include for remote employees.
That's very thoughtful. That's very cool. So we're getting close to the end of our conversation today. So at this point in the podcast, usually I like to ask fun questions to our guests so that our listeners can get to know them a bit more intimately. The first question would be, if you were to invite someone famous or a historical figure to dinner, who would you pick and why?
I would probably say that I would invite Wozniak, one of the co-founder of Apple. I would love to, and he's not that historical, right? He's still very much alive. But I would love to understand the process that they went through. And notice I didn't say Steve Jobs, but I wanted someone with the technical understanding of how things are pulled together, how they're built, because that's something that I really admire, is the people who are the builders, the people who can actually take something from concept to creation. And so I think that would be super fun for me.
I would agree. Actually, it's someone that I hadn't thought of, but I would love to have dinner with the Woz and find out exactly what was the secret sauce and the concept and the thinking behind building those products from his perspective. I would agree. What was your dream job as a kid?
As a kid, I actually wanted to be a cowboy. Now I've lived in Texas most of my life. So insert Texas stereotype here. But as a kid, I actually grew up with a handful of horses on my parents' ranch, and so just understanding that being outside, understanding that path, working with the animals and having that relationship. Always been an animal lover, and so just understanding that relationship with the horse, with the land, with nature was something that I always wanted to do as a little kid, and then as an adult, I developed really, really bad allergies. So I threw that dream out the window.
Oh, all right. Well, and you ended up and Indeed managing the employer talent attraction and employer brands, which is not too bad.
Absolutely, which is kind of the same thing as being a cowboy.
It is to some degree, yes. What could we spot you doing outside of work that would flabbergast your coworkers?
I would say that my coworkers would be surprised to know that I've been skydiving multiple times, and so that would definitely be something that people wouldn't expect. It's something that I started early on, and they, I think they would really be shocked to know that I throw myself out of a perfectly good airplane.
And you land all the time because we're talking today. What is your favorite food?
My favorite food is, I would say, another Texas stereotype, but I would say tacos. And I'm lucky to be living in Austin. That's home to the number 1 and number 2 rated taco restaurants in Austin. And so that's Taco Deli and Torchy's Tacos. So I would definitely call myself a taco aficionado.
Okay. What is the best way for our listeners to follow you and Indeed on social media?
Sure. So Indeed is the handle pretty much everywhere. But if you're looking to discover what it's like to work at Indeed,
right,
that's inside Indeed. And so Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, as well as Snapchat, SoundCloud, a handful of other channels. So look for Inside Indeed, and you can also search the hashtag Inside Indeed to watch the stream of Indeed employees actually sharing their own experiences, which I think is pretty cool. Now, if you want to follow me, you can actually find me on Twitter at Bryan Chaney, and so that's BryanChaney. And so that's where you'll see me making probably the most updates. But I'd love to connect with anyone and follow back as well.
All right, and we'll share those on the podcast notes as well. Any last word of advice or wisdom?
Yeah, I think seeking out, as far as employer branding is concerned, seeking out the community, I think is super important. I think understanding where the expectations are in the market is always tough, especially for a fairly young discipline within talent attraction, like employer or talent branding. And then look for organizations like the Talent Brand Alliance, like HR Open Source, like lots of other organizations that are out there to share knowledge. I think that's one of the best and sometimes overlooked resources as you're trying to grow your career, figure out what the expectations are and how to advance and really build a name for yourself within talent attraction.
So is employer personal branding a critical element to job hunting nowadays? Is it something that you really pay attention to as a recruiter?
You should. The interesting thing about being a recruiter now is that the potential candidates are looking at us and criticizing us almost as much as we are looking at them. And so it's important for you to share what your personality is, what you care about, what you're learning, and all those things beyond just the jobs you're recruiting for, to show some personality. Because people can make a decision to have a conversation with just about any recruiter. The best talent can, right? And so they want to know that they're talking to someone or they're working with someone that they actually like and they would care about, or they wouldn't mind having a conversation with. So letting your personality come out through your personal brand has become more and more important, and that's something that we work on here inside Indeed.
Thank you so much, Bryan.
My pleasure. Really enjoyed it. Thank you, Stefan.
Thanks for tuning in to the EX Podcast. If you want to learn more, visit our website at expodcast.com. If you want to find out more about our next conferences, go to exsummit.com. Finally, you can also find my manifesto on business to employee or B2E branding at b2ebranding.co. See you next week.